My name is Jake Dunnigan. I am the director of the Governance Futures Lab at the Institute for the Future. And I have the pleasure and honor of leading today's Foresight Talk with a friend and fellow futurist, Cecily Summers. Cecily is based in Minneapolis, which we might talk about. If you think about futures and foresight places, you might think about the Silicon Valley or Singapore. But Minneapolis has become the vanguard of futures thinking and action right now. So it'd be interesting to hear what it is like on the ground there. But we have an hour together. So please do introduce yourself in the chat. We're happy to have you here. This is our series that we run at the Institute for the Future. I don't know what number we're on, but we've had plenty of them, many of them, and they're all very exciting. And we will produce and release the video or the audio of this in about a week. So these Foresight Talks as a series, we use them to introduce our community, the Institute for the Future community, to new futurists who we think have something interesting, important to say. And we're trying to grow foresight literacy and capacity amongst our community by making these connections, by learning together and talking to each other. And this is one way that we do this. So our agenda for today, I'm going to open up, talk about our foresight at Institute for the Future. We'll have a conversation with Cecily, and then we'll take some questions from you toward the end today. So our Foresight Essentials has been a program that we created several years ago at the Institute for the Future to bring foresight capacity, training, knowledge, practice to the public. And we do these through a portfolio of trainings to introduce you to strategic foresight and help you implement that and use that in your lives and work. We have sort of three different domains or areas that we target our trainings to. One is for individuals, so you can come to one of our public trainings, sign up. It's open to the public. Space is limited, but it's open to the public, so you can sign up and participate in the class, in the training. We have it for teams. So our training can take place for your organization if you want to bring together 25 or 30 people from your organization. We also have a Coursera course that's really well done and really exciting, so and accessible, that's available. That's also available for individuals, obviously. And then for our community, we do these kinds of talks, webinars. We have our meetups that we engage in as well, and our newsletter that we send out periodically. So those are ways that we communicate with you through our Foresight Essentials program. So I suppose by now everyone's been using Zoom quite a bit, but please introduce yourself in the chat. Make sure you select all panelists and attendees when you do that. You can ask questions, but ask questions, please, for us in the Q&A, not in the chat. So the chat, you can add resources, if something is mentioned, or if you want to share something, please do that in the chat. If you want to ask a question for Cecily, please do that in the Q&A. There's little tabs at the bottom there. And then just to remind everyone, you're automatically muted and your videos will not be seen on this webinar. Okay, Cecily, great. All of that preamble done. Looking forward to talking with you. Cecily is a business futurist. She wrote a really great book called Think Like a Futurist, and has deep experience trying to make sense of the world and help people make sense and do something productive with foresight. And so we're very excited to have you here. Obviously, there's almost no ground that we can stand on that we have certainty for understanding, what's coming. So all of our concepts, the tricks and tools that we use to try to make sense of the world, I know for myself, I've been employing all of them to try to navigate through this and make sense and do something productive in this changing world, exciting world. The space of opportunity is wide open for negative and positive, I guess. But we're looking forward to hearing your perspectives on that. I think you'll give us some structured insights into and processes into how to think like a futurist, how to manage, how to navigate some of the changes that we see. And then what I'd like for you to do is introduce yourself. You can share your screen as soon as I get off here. Introduce yourself, and then just give us the world from your perspective. What are you thinking about? And introduce yourself and your approach there. Sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you, Jake. And I'm just pleased to be with all of you today. It is quite a time when we are all facing uncertainty, as is often said. And from moment to moment, when Jake and I first connected earlier, just 15 minutes ago, have you read the news today? Because it's just the events are rolling. And we do need some ways to hold on and to make sense of our world, what's changing and why, and where it's likely to go and why. And so I am so delighted to be with you and to be a guest of the Institute for the Future. I am a fan and a friend and very much a co-advocate of futures and foresight literacy and what I would call change literacy. So I am a business futurist, and what that means is that I practice strategic foresight, which is simply the addition of foresight and at the fuzzy front end of strategy and innovation. And so it allows us to, again, make sense of what's happening and emerging in the world now, where it's likely to go, as an organization, a society, a group, an individual, how you navigate that through, as I'll share with you, the things that don't change. So part of the literacy for me is always being able to really analyze and make good, thoughtful, grounded scenarios and research on what the potentials of the future might be. And then we are going to navigate strategically through the things that don't change, which are the four forces, which I'll share with you. It is also human nature, which in my view does not change either. And so we want to account for that. And then lastly, the thing that shouldn't change and should really be your ballast and your source of resilience is your purpose. It's the thing that allows you to innovate wisely in the face of all of these potentials. What will you choose? And the choice has to be according to what is it that you have assets for and that you're really committed to. So I am delighted to share some of my thinking and processes. Oh, I do want to acknowledge it as I don't want to be too lost in the bubble of Zoom because there is a big world roiling around us at all times. And in my world here in Minneapolis, it's been roiling loudly and with quite a bit of turbulence with voices entering the fray. So as you may know that actually today is the Houston Memorial Service for George Floyd, who was murdered here in Minneapolis on Memorial Day. And so our city went into quite a response and was kind of the epicenter of social movements that are going across the world. And as I'll share with you, I do think that it's technology and social movements that ultimately push us into new directions that create the systems change as the systems are breaking. They have been weakened. COVID kind of broke loose some of those extra bonds, and now we've got a lot of things that are moving all at once. So with that, let me try to stabilize with you with a view of how we look at the future. I will share, and I hope. I'm so sorry, Aicha, I might need you to be my backup right now.
If it fails, Cecily, you can just take your camera outside and show us what the future is happening outside.
That's right, I'd be happy to do that. You will hear me say one of the phrases that I use because I believe in it so strongly is that, as I said, the things that don't change, purpose being one of them, that what we do during these times is to hold tight to purpose and play loose with tactics. This is, as Jake said, a time with lots of possibility where innovation is going to be very rich. And so I think right now, how are you feeling? There I am. I am helping you hold tight to purpose and play loose with tactics. It is a handy phrase because I think it's a potent one that can ring in your ears as you start to feel the ground get loose. What are you going to hold to? Jake mentioned that I am the author of Think Like a Futurist. The subtitle, as I've referenced, is in order to do foresight productively, we need to know what changes, the conditions of our lives, what doesn't, and then that's how we determine what's next. I thought I would share with you this is a time that actually, instead of looking so much to foresight, we're finding patterns by looking back in history. And the nature of historical shifts, like when society has shifted in big eras, we have seen that what it does is it has a pendular shift from one side to the next. We have just begun, I believe, a shift, as all historical eras do, begin with revolutions. And they ultimately will reverse their course and are typically the birth of a new golden age. So we can consider that this is something that we are going to be working on together as we respond to the very turbulent nature of our environment. I believe that this is the beginning of a decades-long transition. Doesn't mean we have to wait that long to see change, but one of the core questions for us right now that is central to any society is, what is the role of government? And we will be arguing and struggling about that through elections and social movements and changes that need responses until most golden eras are birthed with a re-engagement of more government at the other end. I think we can move right along. Here are some historical shifts of when ancient Athens fell to Persia, and the next slide, which was a military takeover after all of that glorious democracy. And then it finally, some years later, integrated into the Roman Empire, which had begun to scale some of those democratic principles along with the discipline that held it together for that long. We do go through these swings over and over again. I think for our conversation, we'll just skip ahead now through some of the examples. Thank you so much. We're going to continue. We went through the French Revolution.
Wow, I feel the pendulum swinging so fast.
The talk about quick change, we're going through it. But all of this social change gets upended every time that power imbalances are there. And we know that that's typically what causes revolutions, is that nothing is stable for long, that systems do collapse typically because there needs to be a reordering of power, not just within a given society, because it's happening around the world. One of the reasons why we have come to this moment is that we have had some drivers under the surface, most notably our technologies have been driving a new form of economy through AI and biotechnology and quantum that has been shifting what labor looks like and production looks like. These are some of the things that are rising to the surface at the same time that we have, again, a pandemic and some social movements that are really roiling for us. Let's click along. As you can see, each one of these phases had some time. It takes time to create change. We are going to be asked quite a lot to do this. And what it teaches us is that the potentials for many trends exist among us at all times. They just surface when they kind of break through in times of revolution. when we consider one end or the other, we want to make sure that we are looking in both directions. This is something that futurists do when they create scenarios. We call it axes of uncertainty. And as we move ahead here, I'll demonstrate for you that where we may see change in right now, the pandemic that's hit us, we're really looking at kind of a time horizon for what might happen with COVID. Either it burns itself out, we come up with treatments and containment, we may miraculously come up with a vaccine that happens more quickly than we expected, or this pandemic could come back in hard waves for quite some time. It can live among us across the world and continue to come back and disrupt our lives. Along that spectrum, we want to stabilize ourselves by considering both ends of that potential, an axis of uncertainty. As an example, we may also see that while there's been a lot of economic disruption owing to the pandemic first, and now worsened by some of the social movements that are occurring and really fighting for keeping jobs and for rescuing from unemployment, we can consider again, how might that go? Perhaps we'll have a full economic recovery as we open businesses up, the pandemic stops, and we are more or less able to restart our economy, our systems, our government, and business as was usual. We may not be able to do that. We may, in fact, be facing a much longer recession. We may be faced with automation coming into the labor force more as businesses try to get up and going, and the jobs that we once held are now becoming more and more fragile. How will we respond becomes the question. So in this time of rapid change, what we want to do is to consider these axes and check in on them very often, daily, weekly, when we are in this triage phase. It may begin to extend that we update our view of these horizons more within a month to a quarter as things stabilize. We have some time before we are going to see any stability in our midst. Futurists, when we do this, what we do first is we build out different axes of uncertainty. And on the next slide, we can just list a few that are here. As was listed, we may see the pandemic is one axis of uncertainty. Job recovery is another one. These are both really rather existential for us at the moment. When we think about going back to work, might we go back and we just are now practicing more distancing and have plexiglass and temperature readings, but we go back to work as we understood it before? Or will working from home be the new normal? And of course, it could be anywhere in between. If you're in retail, you're thinking about, do physical stores remain the primary shopping experience, augmented by, of course, online shopping as they have been doing? Or do we kind of go to an opposite direction in which we have virtual reality kiosks where we can try things on, maybe engage more of our senses, and have consultants who join us in the moment too, so that we can make the selection of product and delivery. Here we have in Minneapolis, the city council has voted by majority to dismantle our police department. What that looks like will have to be worked out. They think it's going to take a year or more, but they are at least trying to make a statement about this has to be different. Of course, when we look in one direction, we have to look in the opposite. And the opposite side of that is an equal and opposite reaction, just like Newton's forces swing. And that is the law and order police state is equally possible. So we need to entertain these extremes when we consider how might this go. We bring all potentials with us because they live amongst us and within our own natures. And we never just get good, we never just get bad. we get all of it evolving together.
Aicha, are you able to make a full screen of that? I just want to pause and see if that's possible. I don't want to wreck the flow. If you can't, it's okay. So we have it on speaker view, and the equal and opposite reaction is that people want it on presenter view. So trying to demonstrate. There we go. Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Real-time responsiveness. That's awesome.
There we go.
Thank you. Yeah. In any case, one of the things that we also need to be mindful of are all kinds of other disruptions that can happen at the same time. And of course, one of them, particularly as we enter the summer, is what's going to hit us. It may be that 2020 is calm. We have the normal kind of storms, but we can manage them. It may also be that we could have catastrophic hurricanes and earthquakes and fires. And what we do as futurists is just to prepare our thinking. We do thought experiments based on research to consider all of these extreme possibilities so that we are prepared and can take good action in that direction. So, you know, it may be that you are able to populate some of your own lists of what are some of the other axes of uncertainties that you're facing in your own world. There are many. And then you will begin to sort for those that feel most, you have to prioritize those that feel most urgent or most critical to your organization, your business, your society, your community, what policing and public safety looks like. These are the things that when you are trying to address a problem, looking for a solution, consider which axes of uncertainty are most relevant to you. As we do that, we want to maintain our own mindset, that of how to think like a futurist. And as we click through these, first of all, after you consider these extremes, think about what's scaring you. You want to move from a posture of going, oh, that's horrible and scary, to one of curiosity. And make it, you know, your map of where you're going to research and investigate further. The next one. Relate to yourself as not a reactor, but an explorer. We are going into an area of unknowns by definition. The future's always been unknown, but now we're all very cognizant, aware of how uncertain it is. So an attitude of being an explorer is really the one where you want to have some energy around what insights can we gain through our research, and what do we understand about people as they are moving into this time. The next one. Look in unexpected places. You know, as a business futurist, what I do is I save reference to best practices and industries models as a benchmark for the very last reference. We want to look to where we're going to have the greatest understanding of the nature of our inquiry. So look across history right now for sure, economics, look into social movements and also maybe the history of social movements. What does it take to do this well? What have they faced in the past? What is it that we can prepare ourselves for depending on where you stand? Because we're all being asked to take a stand now. That's going to be a map for you to take a look. The next one is as our refrain. Hold tight to purpose and then play loose with tactics. Experimentation is our way forward. We cannot make plans right now. We can just really study ourselves with good knowledge to be prepared to be responsive, to pilot, experiment, and refine until we get enough data to actually start to choose some direction about what's working and what's not. And then lastly, know that there are no answers. This is an ongoing inquiry into the future and how it's shaping, and that it is a commitment to always be on the lookout. As I like to say, forever and ever, amen. The answers are really always, there's far more power in the questions that we lead with. Amen. So those are the things that change when we consider the pendular nature that is rocking our world right now, that we learn to look both ways when we consider our axes of uncertainty. Make sure that when you get excited or scared by a particular direction, that you're looking the opposite direction too, to consider what that might be. That will be at least a good start to having a holistic view of where change may be leading. So what doesn't change? What doesn't change is the four forces of change. As futurists, what we do is we try to understand what's driving this current frothiness and turbulence on the surface. And if we go to the next slide, we'll begin to take at the model that I introduce, the four forces of change, which as we go forward, we will see that there are four forces that help us understand how change emerges. It is a structural model for understanding that it actually, change has its own mechanics. Go ahead, Aisha, we can take a look. And that what we understand is that change may have a predictable dynamic, but its outcomes are not. Events always come unexpectedly, but we can see big patterns shaping when we take a look at these four forces. In the next slide. So the trends that we see on the surface, just as we do now, are organized by four mechanical structural forces that are subterranean. The first one is resources. And resources, we have created society always with what kind of gifts of nature are there for us, our environment offering for us to make life from and for. And then we make use of those resources by the tools that we shape and create, invent and imagine. So technology is the second of these forces. We have to consider when we band together as a group to do more together based on these resources with this technology, what the balance of the group is, and that's our demographics. How do we grow in strength as a population? And so we look to demographics to make sure that it can stay stable over time. We're looking at a mix of gender, of labor skill, of age, and all the things that we need to make sure that we can grow our strength. That's what every group intends to do, grow our strength and stability and by creating some wealth that we can produce and share. And then finally, the last and most superficial and most reactive force is governance. And this is where humans we bring our thinking, for better and for worse, about how we are going to create rules of cooperation. These are everything from the rules of the house and a family to the rules of law in many societies, the rules of market, social mores and traditions. Those are the things that bind us together to maintain our cooperation as we make good use of our resources, invent the tools that we need to sustain our group, manage for the demographics over time, and then respond to change on the surface through governance. We're seeing change in each one of these force fields right now, which is why it is absolutely dramatic with climate change, with exponential technologies, with immigration issues. This is why we see these issues, mobility and climate and war and conflict, economic refugees moving around, because we can with these mobile technologies. And we are looking for new forms of governance to help us make sense and manage what we need to create the future from and in response to these needs. So these are things that don't change. They form where we are now, and they are going to be where we can scan what's changing amongst each of these force fields when we look at what we need to understand according to those axes of uncertainty. Let's skip ahead now. Thank you, Aisha, just to see how these build. And to recognize that as those things are forcing through to the surface, what we understand is that technology, which are the tools of production and distribution, they are economic tools primarily, is that it builds on itself. We keep on gaining more capability over time, from stone to fire to agriculture to industry and now to the computer age. It builds on what came before it. The economies that we build and how they are shaped are in response to what these new capabilities can do. And yet humans typically wait for crises to react to what we are now going to reorganize ourselves around. And it is a time of reordering. I mentioned at the top, I believe we are at the moment when Newton's ball has been released, and systems are breaking, they are asking to be reordered before we can shift to a new form, which we can't yet see, and that we will only discover by innovating and evolving our way into it. It is a clearing period before the reformation of the next age. Let's continue, Aicha. So stability. Where does it come? You know, we're so accustomed to being able to guide ourselves by the stability of the systems, or how businesses run, or how government works, or what the regulations are. And as all of those things are now up for grabs, it is our job to stabilize ourselves. That is how we're going to sustain the turbulence. And it means that for us, where everybody's an innovator now because everything's new, that the single most important capacity for innovation is to be able to stare into the face of uncertainty and keep moving anyway. And I think there we go. Stare into the face of uncertainty and keep moving anyway when you have a few tools to continue to hold tight to purpose and play loose with tactics. This is what it's going to take from you. And so, how we play loose with tactics while holding tight to purpose. I find that there are a few things that we need to remind ourselves to just remain our calm, our vision, and our sense of purpose, and keep it clear. I have a few practices that I find very useful. And the first one is optimism. It's an orientation, really, of mindset. It's one that says, whatever is happening in our midst, I commit to and will see and make good in whatever we're confronted with. I will next apply my curiosity. And we talked about some of the places where you may look when you find yourself going, oh, this is awful, it's scary, I don't like it, is that we want to consciously reverse our posture from resistance and revulsion and start to lean into it and move from ew to, ooh, tell me more. Where can I begin to learn about how to make sense of where we are right now? Courage, I have come to understand in my own experience and as I witness it in others, is not this kind of brazen, bold action. Most of the time it is one of kind of gentleness, of recognizing the fear and anxiety that is already present and saying, we can do this. This future that we are up to doing is worth having. We are the ones to do it. I am the one to do it. And I know that I am capable of learning as we go, playing loose with tactics. I will do so with honesty and humility. There are no answers. There's just the learning that comes from doing. And the one that's hard for all of us is patience. This change, this epochal change from one era to another, a revolutionary change, it's hard. It's just hard. And we want to hold on to things. But we have to recognize that change takes time. And sometimes we can reference our own personal life experience to recognize that principle. We've all been through hard times. And we all know that as we transform and reconstitute our lives, that it is an emergent process. It's not one where you get the answer first and then you just go make it. So it's wise, I believe, to remind ourselves that as we go into the unknown, what are the things that we can refresh ourselves with as we lean in and learn our way into the future? Some questions for you, just as a check. What do you have to be optimistic about right now? I'm sure as you look around your lives and you're feeling fear and anxiety in your eyes, there's also things that you can truly be optimistic about. Have it intersect with your sense of purpose and start to do the research around how does that work? Let's learn some more. That's what takes us into the next question around curiosity. What do you have to be curious about right now? What don't you know that actually getting perspective on? Foresight is so much about the meta view. We zoom all the way out so that we can see how things work and be smart and strategic about where we apply our assets, our interest, our talent. What do you have to be curious about right now? And as you exercise that curiosity and you start to play with what's next, you are for sure going to be needing to resource your courage on maybe even a moment-to-moment basis. What do you have to be courageous about right now? The smallest of acts, champion and celebrate yourself when you just speak up, when you take time out, whatever it is that is going to be courageous for you, it's how we build our capacity for it. And then finally, the reminder to where is patience needed in your life right now? Take the long view, trust the process. You will, as you lean into learning and doing, it will reveal itself to you and you will use the data from doing to find your direction and build from those insights. So I believe that we've got some good frameworks now. Why don't we just, to open a conversation that Jake, you may want to redirect or add some color, but.
Thank you so much. That was so clear, and just providing that anchor is really useful, and I hope everyone found that valuable. I have a couple of questions that I want to ask, and then I want to throw it over to the audience to see what they have to say. But thank you again. Really, a lot of things to think with, and so I have dozens of questions that I would like to ask. But I'm going to do one that's kind of maybe we might call it an emotional or sort of visceral kind of response to one, and then I'll ask a more methods question next. But the first one is, there's a great quote that I always find very provocative. It makes me think, even if I don't agree with it all the time, is from Martin Amis. And he said, it's hard to love when you're racing for impact. And I think we're feeling like we're, on a plane going down in some ways, right? And we're trying to just hold on. And so a lot of what you have said is great. So, having curiosity and, change to be an explorer and the things you said, is that a luxury of being in a privileged spot that you can do that? Or if you're out on the streets staring down a gun or being terrorized right now, where there's life and death facing you, how do you navigate between this kind of big view? I suspect you've answered that in a way, but the moment-to-moment feeling of I've got to deal with what's right in front of me.
Well, I seem to have a propensity for fours. There are four more things, which are the four phases of navigating through crisis. And so thank you for teeing that up so perfectly. The very first phase, when we are utterly disrupted as we are being, and in kind of new ways at all moments, is we move into triage. And triage is first about safety and about protection. So we have to make sure that, you know, and we are bound by, let's take care of us. So whether that's your, however you define your tribe, you will find instinctively that's what you are doing. You are doing so in your organizations, your communities, your loved ones. Make sure that they are safe. We also have to protect our assets. You know, organizations need to look like, what are the things that we know are the things that we must hold on to? And we are reviewing that each time disruption roils, you know, as the next one. From that place of triage mode, which is what you're describing, there you must respond when you are staring down the nose of the barrel in one way or another. But it is safety first. That is the instinctive way to do that, and to protect your assets. The next phase, when we have a little bit of loosening, or what steps can I take? And this is where the experimentation begins. So this is not necessarily, it's an evolutionary arc, but it's not necessarily a linear arc. What I mean by that, it's dynamic. We may go through these phases of triage to experimentation over and over again. If we get to a place where more of the models, let's say the social distancing models, now become just protocols, we begin to adopt them, and that becomes now a new model that we can organize and do a little bit of planning with. We find our planning horizons going from sometimes hour to hour in triage mode to week. We begin to do month to month, quarter to quarter. Once we get some of those protocols in place and begin to get a sense of like, oh, there's something we can move forward with. And that finally leads to what we can, if, you know, when we start to have new models for doing things, we will go back to what we know how to do, which is to manage it. And we will operationalize, we will have, you know, expertise that starts to, you know, bring leadership into a different way of management. But management now, and what the way leadership is needed, is the ones that can quickly mobilize thinking, resources, and wisdom. You know, like that's the deficit in our moment. And my belief, my hope is that those 4 practices, you know, we don't just get wise, we just have it within us, and we can get closer to what's within us when we practice those 4 things. So triage, experimentation, this kind of data and direction when new models emerge. Then finally, you know, at some point we get to scaling again. We're not there now. And we have to recognize where we are in our own development. That's also empowering, is to be, again, kind of the anchoring and the honesty and humility about where we are.
All right, thank you. My next one is kind of methodological. I have a bit of an anathema to mechanistic worldviews. So I'm asking us because I'm genuinely curious. Is, you know, this, you said things that sort of tempered the idea of inevitability, right? Okay, these things are swinging, or we don't know exactly what the outcomes are, but the pattern's the same. And I just want to dig in a little bit deeper and say and ask, you know, is this model inevitable? Is this what we're facing? Are there ways for this pattern to be broken? I mean, I guess emergence comes out of the swing, right? You have it as a pendulum, that model, but maybe it's something that breaks out. But I'm just curious about the new and where it comes from and things that we haven't seen before. And are there, a corollary question, are there historical examples that break this pattern? I mean, is absolute collapse of society that, you know, an end to that pattern? So sort of two sides of that question. Is it always inevitable? And where does emergence come from? And then does this pattern hold in all cases, or does it break down in other cases?
It holds in all cases so far, you know, and so, you know, I looked at these 4 forces because what we're really talking about when we talk about change and where we apply our energies as humans, as in human society. And society is primarily, functionally, an economic project. You know, we come together to do more and share more together because that's what happens when we come together. So and that economic activity always references first, what are the resources to work with? How good are our tools, and how much more does expand? We have to manage the group, and we have to have the rules. And so when societies go through these collapses, they reconstitute themselves from the same four forces. And it does seem to be elemental to what society is. And given that's the construct of humans, it seems to be really a kind of deep structural abiding form for us to reference what's changing in resources. What kind of pressure and issues does it start to press on the surface for? That's where we get trends and where we see issues start to emerge and we argue about it. On the surface is all the argument, which is part of what change looks like. You know, what are the new tools and capabilities coming through technologies? Again, they have pressures on the surface, you know, to AI or not to AI. Well, you know, pandemic hits and I guess we're AIing all over the place. You know, it starts to be the new tool for what will very likely be a new economic model. It will start to press on that too. Demographics, it's all, you know, like these, once again, the roots of change seem to be always organically in these four forces.
Good. I'll follow up with that another time. It's a really interesting conversation. I mean, it's ultimately your view of reality, right? Which is as deep as, and your cosmology, which is as deep as it goes. So a fundamental question. I have one, hopefully a kind of short question, and then we're going to move to the audience, but purpose. Do you determine your purpose before you begin doing futures, or do you do futures first and find your purpose once you've done a longer view?
Well, my answer to a lot of questions is yes. Because, you know, like, will, you know, is society, you know, collapsing and are we, you know, headed towards a very dystopian future, or is it going to be a wonderful time to, yes is the answer. And the same is true about discovery and making of any kind. So purpose is hard, you know, it's hard to articulate. It's something that's much more felt. And we tend to find our articulation through doing and having some track record where we can see what it's about. Most of the time, we lead with what we know for now that feels purposeful. And if it is a stated purpose, you know exactly where you're going. I would say purpose is very often shaped by what your point of view is, you know, and you were just referencing that, Jake, was, you know, what's your worldview or your cosmology? How is it that you're going to meet the needs of your audience, what you think society needs or what your customers are doing or whatever it might be? You have a point of view on that. And that's what allows you to steer in a particular direction. So if it's not clear yet, getting a sense of direction is enough to help you articulate as you go. I do find that I'm often doing that work in the process if it's not already clear.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go now to the audience. We had a question. We're going to begin. What advice would you give leaders of social systems such as education during this time of great shift?
Oh my gosh, just look at all the ways in which education is bending. I do believe that this is a time, speaking of purpose, in which we're asking essential questions like what's the critical needs that education solves for? And you know, different groups may answer that differently, and that tells you what your point of view or purpose would be. But, you know, is it to grow knowledge, critical thinking and skills, and kind of personal development within individuals so they can productively contribute? If that's what it is meant to do, then we're going to be able and must play with it in doing all kinds of hybrid physical and virtual forms. And, you know, you can look all around you to see how people are challenging that out. I would say there are two other axes that are kind of our solution axes right now. One is between physical and virtual, like our solutions are going to be a balance between that, and education will need to sort that out. And the other one is between kind of human, direct human contact and the automated content. And so I think you could use those two axes to say, depending on how we define education, to what degree will it need to be physical, how much virtual, how much human, how much automated? And I think almost every domain right now is going to be solving for those two axes.
Great, thank you. Let's see, what is the role of imagination in this process.
Golly, it's what we create from. I mean, it's, if we are to create and constitute a future, it comes from an idea. And so it is in itself an imaginative act. I'm a fan of Yuval Noah Harari, an Israeli historian, and he talks about, you know, the things that really distinguish humans. It's not digits and tools necessarily. It's the fact that what we do is we create reality from in here. That, and also our mechanism for cooperating at scale, is gossip. And I just love that because it feels so true and descriptive of how societies work. Yeah, the future is only a concept. And so how we imagine it is really what it gives us some direction. Foresight is about, let's make sure that we've got a really smart, grounded view of what we believe the future might hold, so we can anticipate it and be proactive in the choices that we make. That's what I think strategy is all about.
Good. Well, let's go into strategy. And as a business futurist, there's a question here, very practical. How does one go about selling futures thinking as a service?
I will tell you honestly, I don't. You know, people, on occasion, there are clients who come looking for you where they have a hunch about, you know, we know that we need to be looking at, and here's an example from my work, of the future of pet ownership. Or here's a disruption and from working at home, ding dong. Anyway, so what's the future of pet ownership was a question that, you know, a pet food company was asking. And, you know, that's what it feels like for some of these groups of, like, we get a hunch that in order for us to position for advantage, which is what every group tries to do, we should have a view of this. So sometimes they know to ask for it about, and it lives at the highest levels of strategy. It is this front end of strategy and innovation where they may be looking, but it's only those who are already educated in foresight know to ask for that. So I would say people most relate to me, and my practical value is as a strategist who uses foresight tools. So that's my position. I have a background in brand strategy as well. And so, you know, I find once you're in there, it's kind of, you create partnerships and trust that can go into a lot of different places.
Another very practical on the ground question. So the question is starts with really thought provoking. I want to make sure I get that in. The leaders I work with are not patient people. Do you have any thoughts on how I can coach them to be more patient, especially right now when everything is moving so fast?
I don't know that you can. You know, one of the things that I think I've been tempered by in my experience is that, first of all, we can't change people, and we can't really change the systems very well until they break. So you can coach and support people. You know, the best way to build trust and some relaxation among that is, what's the urgent need and how are you going to meet it? You have to do that at the same time that you are offering a longer view of why it's smart or not smart. But, you know, it's so human. And we're not just trying to force the strategy. We have to take care of the people who are in the seats, and the seats are so hot. They're just so hot, and so compassion and respect for what it takes to be there is part of our job too, our own patience. And, you know, and then you have to adapt and move with them and just be really willing to be by their side as they're going all over the place, because that's the nature of it, I think.
Great. Moving back now, there's a question here that we've touched on in different ways, and if we have, you can just say we covered that. But I want to ask it from this questioner's perspective. So forecasting and backcasting have not been effective in identifying outliers and possibilities that we can't imagine. What approaches can we take to explore the evolutionary emergent potential of the present?
Well, you know, in foresight, we talk about wild cards. You know, there are probably three I'm diverting a little bit. But, you know, I think that there are kind of three big threats right now, existential threats. You know, we've got one of them, pandemic and kind of biological action. Nuclear war might be another. There is also just environmental collapse that could really cause enormous disruption. So if we begin to identify where we think potential outliers might be, then we kind of create lookout posts for what we think they can be. And then the rest of the job is we can't know. I mean, that's part of it. What you have to accept is that we can't know everything. We can just really work on ourselves to have good skills, good tools, and kind of a core stability for when things hit. How do we continue on from a place of responsiveness? We kind of know what to do, how to find our way forward. There's no human being ever who is not navigating the unknown. We just try to know a little bit more, to be a little bit smarter, and then when the new information comes, have some tools to make sense of it in the next round. So that's a philosophical response to rather than a methodological response, I suppose.
Great, thank you. And I will maybe one, maybe two more, depending on how long we have answered these. But what could be the role of co-creation and participatory design in your framework?
Oh golly, it's everything. You know, like I'm going to grab from, rip from the headlines of, let's dismantle the police department here in Minneapolis. The one thing that they're saying is, number one, if public safety is the issue, let's raise that central question. What is public safety supposed to be comprised of, and how do we manage that? These answers aren't going to be easy, but the dedication, number one, is to say, what we got is not working for a whole lot of people who are a part of our public. And the next piece is to say, and as we figure out what might be a new model and experiment our ways forward, we are going to include community voices and make sure that those things can be included. Nobody knows how to do this other than just to really include participative design. It always helps to have your objectives clear or your questions clear so that you can bring out the best in people. Otherwise, it's going to be fraught in any case. But I do think, for me, I'm a huge one for defining those questions on the front end.
Mm-hmm. Great. Something just occurred to me as you were saying that, thinking about the kind of wild swings that we're seeing from, only expanding police forces all of a sudden within a few weeks to dismantling police forces, which was not even the wildest dreams of radical, very few people. I'm wondering about let's buy for a moment the pendulum swing, right? How long is it? Is the pattern the same, but the timing can speed up? Could we see wild pendulum swings in a matter of weeks or days rather than generations, or is it a more generational scale? Because your examples are very much generational scale. Can those pendulums swing in days or weeks?
Well, they are right now. I think we're in days and weeks because of where we are in our election cycle and where we are as a country politically. With governance being the thing in question, we are all living with a really big question: is what is the role of government? And that's been central to political debate for a long time. But when government is, no matter where you're standing, I would imagine there's a certain level of agreement that government is mostly failing, but you're going to have different views on what that is. So because it's so heightened, and because we have a presidential election and also congressional elections coming up, it's I think really right now. We are going to get, the equal and opposite reactions at all moments. I mean, that's why it feels, I feel self-conscious when I describe it, except that it's just, this is the way it is. Are we going to dismantle police forces, or are we going to have a police state? And those are right now it is in front of us about all possibilities on the table. So I think it's going to go like this, and we experience it all the time right now.
Great. So we're going to wrap up now. Thank you. Also, just want to say maybe those forces have been in effect for generations, and we're only seeing the sort of surface response to things that have been happening under the surface for a long time. Let me go now and just wrap up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cecily, so much. This was really wonderful to have your perspective and to get these frameworks for thinking, and very useful and provocative at the same time. Here's our contact information. If you want to reach out to us by email, we will have a recording of this available. Usually it takes about a week to do that. Our next one, I want to put in a plug for our next Foresight talk, which is with Leah Zaidi, and Jane McGonigal will be hosting that, and that's July 16th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Also, I just want to put in a plug for the Design Futures training course. I didn't mention that at the beginning. That's going to be held July 7th, 8th, and 9th. So if you're interested in a design experiential futures part of Foresight, please look into that, and we'd love to have you in that course. Okay, everyone, have a great rest of your day, and ride that pendulum.